I broke my leg, and while I was lying in the emergency room, my husband called me 52 times to order, "You didn't break your hands. Come home and cook for my mother." I didn't argue. I made a single call to my attorney, never imagining that one decision would uncover a secret capable of costing him his marriage, his home, and even his position as a regional director. "You broke your leg, not your hands. Order an Uber and come serve the food." That was my husband, Austin, on speakerphone at 2:47 on a Saturday afternoon, while a doctor I had met 11 minutes earlier put the 8th stitch into my calf. I was flat on a gurney in Bay 6 of the emergency department at St. Jude General in San Diego. A silver Camry had run the red light at Grand Avenue while I was in the crosswalk with 2 grocery bags, heavy cream and chives, the last items for a funeral reception I had been cooking for 2 days, tibial plateau fracture, right leg, 8 stitches where the curb had opened my calf, a splint from ankle to thigh. My phone had buzzed 52 times before I answered it. 52 calls in 90 minutes. 1 text. The text did not say, "Are you okay?" The text said, "Where is the food?" "Austin," I said. "I'm in the emergency room. My leg is broken." He laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A cold one. The kind you use on an employee who has brought you an excuse instead of a result. "Today is the gathering after my dad's funeral. The house is full of relatives. Mom hasn't eaten a thing. You were supposed to cook everything. Don't make a big deal out of a broken leg." The trauma nurse went completely still. Dr. Priya Raghavan, 11 years of emergency medicine, a woman with the unshakable calm of someone who has seen every kind of Saturday, stopped mid-stitch and looked at my phone like it had said something in a dead language. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of cooking for his family, serving his mother, standing at counters while everyone else sat. Something in me snapped, clean and quiet, right along with the bone. "Listen carefully," I said. My voice didn't shake. I remember being surprised that it didn't shake. "From today, I don't cook for your mother. I don't serve your family. And I won't be your wife. I'm filing for divorce." I hung up before he could say another word. Over the next 9 days, my husband lost his marriage, his home, and the job title he loved to announce at parties. People who heard about it later assumed I destroyed him. I didn't. I made 4 phone calls from that hospital bed, and then I stopped standing between Austin Parker and the truth. The 4th call is the reason you're hearing this story. But to understand the 4th call, you have to understand who I actually am, because for 3 years, my husband never asked. My name is Elena Corrales. I grew up in Chula Vista, in a 2-bedroom house that smelled like diesel and cilantro. My father drove a refrigerated truck for 30 years. Produce up from the border, 4 a.m. starts, hands like cracked leather. I started answering phones at a freight brokerage at 19 because it paid $2 more than the movie theater. By 24, I was running the dispatch board. By 26, I had my own brokerage, 3 phones, a folding table, and a reputation for never, ever missing a delivery window. The reputation came from nights like the one in my 2nd year, when a driver abandoned a full load of strawberries in Bakersfield at 1:40 in the morning. I found a replacement truck by 3:15, rode along to the receiver myself, and had the load docked in Los Angeles before the produce buyer finished his coffee. That buyer told 2 other buyers. That's the whole industry. Freight runs on the question who answers the phone at 2 a.m., and the answer, for a long time, was me. By my early 30s, I was buying distressed carriers the way other people buy fixer-upper houses. I rolled everything into a holding company and gave it a name that sounded like it had always existed. Pinnacle Global Group. Private. No press. 9 operating companies eventually, trucks and warehouses and brokerage floors, and my name on none of the doors. 2 things happened along the way that explain everything that came later. The first was a man I trusted like a brother, my operations manager, back when the company was small enough to feel like family. At 29, I noticed something odd in our payables. A vendor I didn't recognize, invoicing in strange, tidy amounts. $9,400, $9,700, $9,150, always just under the $10,000 threshold that would have required my signature. Always just under. I pulled 11 months of invoices and did the math on the bathroom floor of my apartment, because math has always been how I pray. He'd taken $190,000 through a vendor that didn't exist. I fired him on a Tuesday, tightened every control we had, and never forgot what skim looks like on paper. It looks polite. It looks like roundish numbers standing in a neat row, each one careful not to raise its hand. The second was a fiancé. At 33, I got engaged to a man who was handsome and funny, and, I found out 4 months in, had described me to his girlfriends as my retirement plan. I heard him say it. I was carrying drinks to the patio, which should have told me something all by itself. After that, I rebuilt my life like a firewall. My ownership went into a trust with my initials and nothing else. I stepped out of the CEO chair and installed Jonathan Solomon, a man who had run operations for me for a decade, unflappable and discreet. A man I had heard raise his voice exactly once in 15 years, at a forklift. I kept the majority stake and the board control and took my face off everything public. Then I made myself a promise. Whoever loved me next would love a woman with a paid-off Honda Civic and a modest condo in Bay Park, or he would not love me at all. I met Austin Parker at a paella class in Little Italy when I was 36. He was there on a company mixer, charming in a rolled sleeves way, quick to laugh, quick to take over the pan. He was a director at Halverson Freight, which made me smile privately. San Diego logistics is a small world, and here was a man from my own industry with no idea who I was. When he asked what I did. I said I consulted on supply chain projects and had retired early off some good investments. He heard unemployed with savings, and I watched him decide he liked that. He liked providing. I liked being just Elena. It felt, at the time, like a fair trade. The first year was mostly good, if you were grading generously, which I was. There were flags. He ordered for me at restaurants without asking. His mother, Christina, shook my hand at our first meeting and said, "You'll learn how we do things," which I filed under nervous mother instead of mission statement. His father, Raymond, was the quiet one, a man who had run an auto parts counter for 31 years and who, the second time I visited, fixed the squeak in my Civic's door without being asked and never mentioned it. I liked Raymond immediately. That turned out to matter. The first time I understood my actual job description in the Parker family, it was Christina's 64th birthday, 5 months into the marriage. I cooked for 14 people, brisket, 2 sides, a lemon cake from scratch. I ate standing at the kitchen counter because the table was full, and when Christina introduced me to a cousin, she said, "This is Austin's wife. She's doing the food." Not her name, her function. The strange detail wasn't the sentence. It was the realization, somewhere between clearing plates, that I had never once sat down at a Parker family table. Not at Christmas, not at Easter, not ever. I told myself every family has its liturgy, and that this was theirs, and that being useful was a way of being loved. Immigrant kid logic. Work hard, be needed, belong. Then carrying the cake through the hallway, I heard Christina's voice from the den, talking to her sister Dee. She's from nothing, but she works hard. Austin could have done better, but a wife who cooks is worth keeping. The heat went up my neck like a stove hoil. I stood in that hallway holding a lemon cake with 64 candles and gripped the platter until my knuckles ached. And then I walked in smiling, because that is what you do, apparently. A week later, I suggested we cater the next family event. Austin looked at me the way you look at someone who has proposed selling the house. You want to embarrass my mother? Cooking is how you show respect in this family. I bought a second apron. I want to be honest about that. I didn't fight. I bought a second apron, a nicer one, and I told myself it was a uniform I was choosing. Month 17. Austin came home vibrating, dropped his keys in the bowl, and announced he'd been recruited away from Halverson. Regional director. Big jump, real authority, corner office in Kearney Mesa. Who's the company? I asked, stirring something. Apex Logistics, he said. You wouldn't know them. They're huge. The spoon kept moving. That's the part I'm still proud of. The spoon did not stop. I knew Apex Logistics the way you know your own handwriting. Pinnacle had acquired Apex 6 years earlier. 400 employees. The crown jewel of my 9 companies. I had written its compensation bands personally. I had approved the carpet in the lobby he'd interviewed in. That night I lay awake next to him and drafted the sentence in my head. Austin, I own the company that just hired you. I built the whole speech. Where we'd be sitting, how I'd explain the trust, the fiancé, the firewall. And then I looked at his sleeping face and thought about a man on a patio saying my retirement plan, and the speech dissolved, and I told myself the truth could wait for a stronger year of the marriage. Instead, at 7:40 the next morning, I called Jonathan Solomon from the parking lot of Avon's, engine off. My husband accepted the Southwest Regional Director role at Apex, I said. You will treat him exactly like any other hire. No favoritism, no extra scrutiny. And Jonathan, he doesn't know. He won't. There was a pause long enough to be an opinion. Understood, ma'am, Jonathan said. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I understood even then that I had just made my secret load bearing. What I did not understand was that I had also just recused myself from the one company in my portfolio where my instincts were about to matter most. I had promised myself I would never be the woman who audits her own husband. I kept that promise for 19 more months. I have regretted the promise. I have never regretted keeping it because when it finally broke, it broke clean, in front of witnesses, with my leg in a splint. Month 22, February. Austin came home in a Range Rover Sport the color of wet charcoal. Year-end bonus, he said, tossing me the fob like a man in a commercial. Baby, we've arrived. Here is what I knew, standing in my driveway, holding the fob to a $118,000 vehicle. Apex Regional Directors earned a $185,000 base. I wrote that band. The annual bonus was capped at 25%, and in a good year, a great year, that's $46,000 before taxes. The math did not reach this driveway. The math wasn't in the same zip code as this driveway. I told myself stories. Maybe he financed it. Maybe he'd been saving harder than I realized. Maybe Raymond had helped. Fathers do that. Then, in March, looking for the insurance card in his desk, I found the purchase folder, cashier's check, $118,400, paid in full, drawn on our joint account. I logged into the account for the first time in months, and my hands went cold on the keyboard. The balance was $437,000. 6 months earlier, it had been $71,000. I counted backward twice. The number stayed. At dinner, I tried, with the lightest voice I own, the account's looking healthy. Is Apex paying you in gold bars now? Austin's fork stopped. Since when do you read the statements? I handle the money. You handle the kitchen. Christina, who was over that night because Christina was always over, added without looking up, a woman who counts her husband's money is planning to spend it. I let it drop. I filed it. That was my system in those years. Notice, rationalize, file. I had built a 9-company holding group on the principle that numbers don't lie, and I was living in a house where I'd agreed contractually in my own head not to look at them. Month 28, a Tuesday. Austin's iPad was on the kitchen counter, and it lit up while I was drying my hands. Wire received $41,500. Westbridge Vendor Solutions, LLC. I stood there with the dish towel and read it 4 times. I know vendors. I have spent my entire adult life in the space between vendors and the companies that pay them. Vendors do not wire $41,000 to a salaried employee's personal account. That is not a category of thing that happens. When I asked, Austin didn't even look up from the game. Side consulting, a buddy's startup. I advise, they pay. Don't overthink it, L. That weekend, while he golfed, I did something I had every legal right to do and had never done. I sat down with 14 months of statements from our joint account. My name is on that account. And a yellow legal pad, and I built a ledger. 31 deposits. All from Westbridge Vendor Solutions, LLC. $38,200, $43,750, $41,500, $39,900, $44,600. Every single one between $38,000 and $44,900. Every single one just under $45,000. I sat on the bathroom floor with the pages spread around me, the way I had at 29, and I did not cry. I did math. Just under is not a coincidence. Just under is a behavior. Just under means somewhere there is a $45,000 approval threshold, and someone who knows exactly where it is, and a neat row of polite numbers, each one careful not to raise its hand. My stomach understood before I let my head sign off on it. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the login page for Pinnacle's board portal. One query, one search of Apex's approved vendor master file, and I would know if Westbridge was in it, and everything after that would be simple. I looked at that login screen for a long time, then I closed the laptop. I had promised, not him, me. I had promised myself I would not become a woman who surveils her husband through a company he doesn't know she owns, because if I did that, then the secret wasn't a firewall anymore. It was a weapon I'd been keeping loaded. So I closed the laptop, and I gave the marriage 11 more weeks to tell me the truth on its own. It didn't, of course. Something better happened. Someone else told me. Raymond's kidneys had been failing for a year by then, and it was me who drove him to dialysis Tuesdays and Fridays in the Civic, because Austin was always slammed. I never minded. Those drives were the best part of the Parker family. Raymond did crosswords in the passenger seat and called me kiddo and asked real questions and listened to the answers. 3 weeks before he died, in the parking lot outside the clinic, he put down the crossword. Elena, he said, the money my son has. I didn't give it to him. Halverson didn't pay like that, and no honest freight job pays for that car. I kept both hands on the wheel. I ran a parts counter 31 years, Raymond said, looking straight ahead. I know what skim looks like. It looks like a man whose story changes when you ask twice. He tapped the folded newspaper against his knee once. Look after yourself, kiddo. I noticed the wipers were on. It wasn't raining. I had turned them on at some point without knowing. I'll talk to him, I said. I never got to. Raymond died on a Tuesday, a dialysis day, with the crossword pen still clipped in his shirt pocket. The funeral was set for Saturday. Christina assigned me the reception the way you assign a shift. 9 dishes, 40 people, Raymond's favorites. And here's the thing I need you to understand, because it's the only reason I was in that crosswalk. I cooked those 2 days for Raymond. Not for her, not for Austin. For the man who fixed my car door and warned me at a dialysis clinic. Carnitas, the way he liked his mother's rice. I was going back for heavy cream and chives at 1:52 on Saturday afternoon when the silver Camry ran the red at Grand Avenue. I remember the grocery bag more than the car. Chives everywhere. Sky. Then asphalt. And a stranger's voice saying, don't move, don't move. I called them. Which brings us back to basics, the 8th stitch, 52 missed calls, and the sentence that ended my marriage. You broke your leg, not your hands. 30 minutes after I hung up on my husband, 2 San Diego police officers walked into my ER bay. Officer Daniel Ramos, Northern Division, a compact man with a notepad already open, and his partner, Officer Katie Chen. Ma'am, we're following up on a report, Ramos said carefully. Your husband called it in. He stated you abandoned an elderly woman during a family emergency and that your whereabouts are unknown. I want you to sit with that. My husband knew I was in an emergency room. I had told him on the phone, on speaker, in front of medical staff, and he had then called the police and reported me missing. I didn't argue. Arguing is for people without documentation. I handed Officer Ramos the accident report number from the responding unit at Grand Avenue. I turned my phone around and showed him the call log, 52 calls, time-stamped, and the single text, where is the food? Dr. Raghavan pulled up the x-rays and said, in the flattest professional voice I have ever loved, this patient has a tibial plateau fracture. She is non-weight-bearing. She could not walk out of this hospital if she wanted to, and she will likely need surgery this week. I didn't disappear, I said. I'm hospitalized. My husband knew exactly where I was. He still lied to the police. Ramos and Chen looked at each other in that way partners do. Then Ramos called Austin back from the department line, so the caller ID did the talking. I could hear Austin's voice change in real time. The bark he'd used on me for 90 minutes turned to syrup in 1 second flat. I honestly didn't know she was hurt that badly, he stammered. You didn't know, I said, loud enough for the phone to catch it, because you never asked. Ramos advised him, in the specific board tone officers reserve for this, that knowingly filing a false report is its own conversation, documented the incident, and wished me a fast recovery. The report went in the file. Files matter. Remember that. Austin called my cell 4 minutes after the officers left and the syrup was gone. He detonated. If I filed for divorce, I'd get nothing. The penthouse in La Jolla, his. The rain Range Rover, his. The $1.2 million in the joint account, his, all of it, every cent. You'll leave with a broken leg and not a single penny. I looked at the splint. I felt absurdly very calm. The 2 a.m. strawberry load kind of calm, the kind that shows up when there is finally, clearly, only one right move on the board. You're wrong, I said. I'm not leaving your house. I'm withdrawing my assets from your life. The first asset is me. I hung up. Then I made 4 calls. The first was to the bank. I did not move a dollar. My lawyer would have skinned me. And anyway, I already suspected what a lot of those dollars actually were. I requested certified copies of every statement on the joint account and placed an alert for any transfer over $10,000. The second was to Megan Reyes, my best friend since she was my first dispatcher at the folding table, and one of exactly 3 people on Earth who knew what my initials on a trust document meant. I told her everything in 4 minutes. She said 3 words. On my way. Then, because she is Megan, finally. The third was to Cynthia Strickland, founding partner of Strickland and Moya, 22 years in practice, a certified family law specialist who had spent her first decade litigating civil fraud, which was about to be extremely relevant. Cynthia listened without interrupting, which is her superpower, and then said, Rule 1, touch nothing, document everything. Rule 2, in California, most of what he's calling his has a shorter word, ours. And Rule 3, Elena. A pause I could hear her smiling through. Tell me more about Westbridge. The fourth call was to Jonathan Solomon, CEO of Pinnacle Global Group. Jonathan, I said, pull the full employment file on Austin Parker, Regional Director at Apex Logistics, and schedule a surprise audit of his office. Fold Apex into the rotating compliance review. Move it up 2 quarters. Bring the outside forensic team. Make it look routine. There was a pause. 15 years of pauses, and I could read every one of his. This one was, at last. Should anyone know who gave the order, ma'am? He asked very quietly. I looked at the heavy splint on my leg. Not yet. By 5:45, Austin marched into my hospital room with his mother. Neither of them asked how I was. I noted that the way an auditor notes a missing signature, not with hurt anymore, just for the record. Christina went first. You useless freeloader. My son feeds you, and you couldn't even show up for his father. For Raymond, that one actually landed. I had carnitas for 40 people sitting in that man's honor in my refrigerator. But grief is not a debate you can win in a hospital room, so I said nothing, and Austin took my silence as the floor. I make $180,000 a month, he said, smirking, loud enough for the hallway. Without my salary, you couldn't afford to eat. I need to tell you what that sentence sounded like from inside my head. Apex regional directors make $185,000 a year. I wrote the band. My husband had just stood in front of witnesses, a nurse charting in the corner, his own mother, and announced that his income was roughly 12 times his salary. He thought he was humiliating me. He was testifying. Then the door opened, and Megan walked in with Cynthia Strickland, who set her card on the bedside table with a small, precise click. All divorce, property, and harassment matters now go through my office. Austin laughed in her face. He actually leaned down over my bed rail, close enough that I could smell the reception whiskey, and delivered what he clearly believed was checkmate. You don't even have a job. I'm the regional director of a massive corporation. Fight me and you lose everything. I looked straight up at him, completely calm. The room had gone very quiet. Megan told me later she was holding her breath. Then hold on tight to your chair, I said. A storm is coming. He was still laughing when he reached the elevator. Christina followed him out without a word to me. The nurse in the corner exhaled, looked at Cynthia's card on the table, looked at me and said, Ma'am, I don't know what that was, but I'm on your side. Sunday, I spent flat on my back with my leg elevated, Megan asleep in the recliner, learning the specific patients of pain medication schedules. The orthopedic team scheduled surgery, a plate and screws, for Thursday at 6 a.m. once the swelling came down. Cynthia filed the divorce petition for Monday morning. At 9:15 that night, Jonathan texted, team confirmed, 8 a.m. Monday morning, the storm arrived exactly on schedule. The audit team walked into Apex Logistics in Kearney Mesa at 8 a.m. sharp, led by Deborah Okafor, CPA certified fraud examiner, 19 years in forensic accounting, a partner at Corrigan Forensic Group with the demeanor of a very pleasant guillotine. Austin, I'm told, greeted them with coffee and jokes. He thought a routine audit meant flipping through dinner receipts. Instead, per the engagement letter, they imaged his computer. They boxed his invoices. They pulled his system access logs, his approval history, his fuel card records, his GPS data, every drawer, every file, standard chain of custody procedure, every item logged and initialed, because Deborah Okafor's teams inventory everything. By 8:40, he was pacing. By 8:55, he was in his office with the door not quite closed, sweating through his shirt, screaming down the phone at Jonathan Solomon. Who authorized this? I'm the regional director. Give me the name on that order. At 9:04 a.m., my phone rang in my hospital bed. Jonathan's voice was perfectly calm. He's demanding a name, ma'am. What do I tell him? I looked at the splint on my leg, and I smiled for the first time in 3 years. Tell him the order came from the founder and majority owner of Pinnacle Global Group, the company that owns Apex Logistics, his office, and every dollar of his salary. Tell him it came from his wife. Jonathan delivered it word for word. He confirmed this later because I asked, because I am human. He said Austin sat down very slowly, like a man lowering himself into cold water, and didn't speak for a full minute. Then he asked to call his lawyer. Deborah Okafor handed him the conference bathroom phone and said, "Local calls only while the imaging finishes." If this were a shorter story, it would end there. It's not a shorter story because 9:04 a.m. Monday was not the ending. It was the point where I stopped being the only person looking. Over the next 72 hours, Okafor's team mapped the thing I had been refusing to map for 19 months. Westbridge Vendor Solutions, LLC, registered in Nevada 19 months earlier, 6 weeks after Austin started at Apex. Registered agent, a mail drop service, sole managing member, Derek Foss, Austin's college roommate from SDSU, a consultant with no office, no employees, and no discernible services. The scheme was almost insultingly simple. Westbridge invoiced Apex for phantom line items on real freight, expedite coordination fees, detention mitigation services, the kind of plausible junk that hides in a busy region's payables. As regional director, Austin held single signature approval authority up to $45,000 per invoice, 61 invoices in 19 months, every one of them between $38,000 and $44,900, everyone just under. A neat row of polite numbers, none of them raising a hand. Total, $2.71 million. Foss kept roughly 20% for running the shell. The rest flowed back to Austin, the consulting wires into our joint account, the Range Rover, and a $640,000 penthouse down payment routed through a second entity called Blue Water Holdings, so it wouldn't touch the joint statements at all. The $1.2 million he'd screamed about over the phone, the money I would supposedly never see a penny of, stolen, sitting in an account with my name on it. He had been threatening me with the evidence. And then, Wednesday morning, Deborah Okafor found the part that turned a bad week into a crisis. 14 of the 61 invoices hadn't just been eaten by Apex. They'd been passed through as billable surcharges to Apex's largest customer, Corvana Medical, a medical device shipper whose account was worth a third of Apex's revenue and roughly 300 jobs. $562,000 of fraudulent fees billed onward to a client, which meant the client had been defrauded too. On my company's paper, under my roof. Wednesday was the worst day, and it had nothing to do with my leg. At 11:20 a.m., the bank alert fired. Austin had attempted a $900,000 wire out of the joint account to a newly opened account that traced within an hour to another Foss entity. The bank froze the transfer pending review. My flag and Cynthia's letter had done their job. The money didn't move. Austin, according to the branch manager's notes, did not take it well. At 1 p.m., Cynthia forwarded me a letter from Austin's new attorney, Bram Kessler, a defense lawyer whose billboard I had personally driven past on the 805 for years. The offer, Austin resigns quietly. Mutual NDAs. No law enforcement referral, no client disclosure. He keeps the penthouse, the Range Rover, and half the joint account. Offer expires 5 p.m. Thursday. And stapled to it, politely, a threat, decline, and they take a story to the press. Billionaire wife secretly owned husband's employer, spied on him for years, weaponized her company against him the moment the marriage soured. 10 years of anonymity. The firewall I had built after a man called me his retirement plan on a patio. That was the hostage. At 3:30 p.m., the third system lit up. Corvana's procurement office contacted Jonathan about the contract renewal. Signing scheduled for Thursday, 10 a.m. Standard closing item, an integrity certification. Apex certifies in writing that it knows of no fraud or material irregularity affecting the account. Cynthia laid it out for me over speakerphone, flat and clean, while Megan charged my phone because it had hit 4% at the worst possible moment. Option 1. Take Kessler's deal. He walks with the loot, you keep your privacy, you sign that cert knowing what's in Okafor's memo. And the moment you do, Elena, the fraud has your fingerprints on it too. Option 2. Disclose to Corvana before signing and refer everything to the police. They have a termination for integrity clause. They can walk. A third of Apex's revenue, 300 jobs. And your name comes out in a courtroom, on his lawyer's terms or yours. There's no option where all three survive. I said, the deal, the client, and the truth. No, Cynthia said, there isn't. And your surgery is at 6 a.m., so you're deciding tonight. I want to be honest about that night because the internet loves a woman of steel, and I wasn't one. I was flat on my back in a hospital bed, nothing by mouth after midnight, heel drumming against the mattress until the splint ached. I made lists on the back of a discharge instructions packet. I always make lists when I'm scared. On one side, 300 names I didn't know. Warehouse crews and drivers and dispatchers, folding table people, my people. On the other, one sentence from a dialysis clinic parking lot. I know what Skim looks like. It looks like a man whose story changes when you ask twice. At 9:41 p.m., I stopped listing and started calling. Jonathan set up the call, but I did the talking, because some certifications you deliver yourself. Alan Brewer had run Corvana's supply chain for 20 years, a former Navy logistics officer with a reputation for being allergic to varnish. At 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, he picked up his cell and heard a voice he had never heard before. Mr. Brewer, my name is Elena Corrales. I founded Pinnacle Global Group, and I'm its majority owner, which means Apex Logistics is mine. You and I have never spoken. That was by my design, and this week the design failed. Before your team signs anything at 10 a.m., you need to know what my auditors found. I gave him everything. The scheme, the 14 pass-through invoices, the number, $562,000. Then the plan, Okafor's full forensic report on his desk by Friday, restitution of every fraudulent equivalent dollar within 10 days from Pinnacle, not from litigation someday, a fee credit on the renewal, a 90-day third-party integrity audit of the entire account at our cost, my personal guarantee in writing, with the name I'd spent 10 years keeping off of paper. Alan Brewer was silent for a long moment. You could have signed the cert, he finally said. I'd never have known. You'd have known eventually, I said. That's how it works with the truth. You always pay. The only variable is the interest. Another silence. Then, dry as sand, my father drove trucks. 10 a.m., still work for you people? At 10:15 p.m., Cynthia answered Bram Kessler's deadline, 18 and a half hours early, in 2 lines. No terms. The certified statements are already with SDPD Economic Crimes. At 6 a.m. Thursday, they wheeled me into surgery. The last thing I remember is the anesthesiologist asking me to count backward from 10. Counting backward is how I caught him. It felt right to go under doing it. I woke at 11:30 to Megan sitting on the edge of the bed with a legal pad, reading me the morning like a dispatcher reading the board. Corvana signed at 10:02, conditions attached. The Apex board met at 10:30. Jonathan terminated Austin for cause under delegated authority, effective immediately, all access revoked. At 11:05, Austin carried a box out of the Kearney Mesa building past the front desk. Deborah Okafor kept the inventory of the box. Auditors, inventory, everything. The rest unspooled the way these things actually unspool. Slowly, on paperwork, without a soundtrack. Detective Laura Meissner of SDPD's Economic Crimes Unit, 14 years in financial investigations, took the referral and did not need it explained twice. Subpoenas went out. Derek Foss lasted 3 weeks before his own lawyer marched him in for a proffer agreement, and Foss handed over everything: the signal threads, the Westbridge Bank records, and a spreadsheet Austin had kept on his personal laptop tracking the whole scheme, which he had named, and I am quoting the case file, sidehustle.xlsx. 19 months of just under $45,000, and he labeled it like a lemonade stand. Austin was charged in month 2, grand theft and money laundering, and self-surrendered with Kessler at his elbow. The press expose never ran. It turns out billionaire wife headlines don't help a defendant awaiting trial, and Kessler knew it. One logistics trade blog covered the charges. My name appeared exactly once, in the 11th paragraph. His estranged wife, a shareholder. The unmasking I had feared for 10 years was, in the end, 1 sentence long. I read it twice and went to physical therapy. The divorce finalized in month 8, uncontested, because by then Austin had run out of things to contest. The penthouse he'd promised I would never touch was sold under stipulation, proceeds into the restitution escrow, because you don't get to keep a home purchased with a client's stolen freight fees. The Range Rover was surrendered. The $1.2 million he'd sworn I'd never see a penny of went where it had always belonged, back, with interest. In month 11, he pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts, 3 years, eligible in 18 months, restitution order of $2.9 million with interest. Foss got probation for cooperating. I did not attend the sentencing. Cynthia went and told me he looked for me in the gallery twice. I was at physical therapy that hour, relearning stairs, step, cane, step. It felt like the better use of the hour. Christina called me exactly once, in month 4, not to apologize. You did this to him, she said. No, I said. He did this in front of me for 19 months. I just finally looked. I hung up gently. Some months later, I paid off Raymond's outstanding hospice balance, $9,300, handled quietly through the billing office, and I mailed Christina the crossword pen Raymond had left clipped to my Civic's visor after our last drive, with a 2-line note. He was kind to me. I'm sorry for both your losses. She never replied. I didn't need her to. It's been a little over a year now. There's a plate and 7 screws in my right leg. It aches before rain, which in San Diego makes it the least employed barometer in America. Last month, I walked back across Grand Avenue, at the same crosswalk. On a green light, I did not need to check twice, but checked twice anyway, and I bought heavy cream and chives for no recipe at all. It felt like closing a file. I still own Pinnacle. Jonathan still runs it, better than I ever did. Twice a year, I sit in the back row of the Apex All Hands wearing a visitor badge that says E. Corrales, and nobody looks twice, which is how I like it. Some habits outlive their reasons. Deborah Okafor's integrity audit became a permanent annual fixture across all 9 companies, and the approval thresholds now come with pattern alerts, because polite rows of just under numbers will never again stand quietly in my payables. On Sundays, I cook. That surprised people. It never surprised me. Cooking was never the thing that was taken from me. The table was. So now Megan comes, and Cynthia when she's free, and my physical therapist, who has earned carnitas for life, and I sit at my own table, at the head of it, in a chair that wobbles slightly. I haven't fixed the wobble. I like the reminder that I'm the one who decides what gets repaired. My phone still buzzes. 52 in a day is easy when 9 companies are yours. Approvals, small fires, a driver stranded outside Bakersfield who needs someone to answer at 2 a.m. I answer when I answer. Because here's what 3 years of marriage taught me, and 1 broken leg confirmed. The people who call you 52 times to demand that you serve them were never once calling to ask how you are. He told me I'd leave with a broken leg and not a single penny. He was half right. The leg healed.